What if the ancient routes birds flew across the world weren't just about survival, but about shaping the course of human history? We often think of bird migration as a natural phenomenon, a seasonal dance across the skies. But what if these invisible highways of the air were also the silent arteries of trade, conquest, and empire? What if the same winds that carried birds across continents also carried ideas, goods, and... Consider this. The very paths that swallows, cranes, and storks have followed for millennia may have been the same routes used by ancient traders, explorers, and invaders. These migratory corridors, invisible to most of us, may have been the unseen scaffolding upon which entire civilizations were built. The Silk Road wasn't just a human invention. It may have been a natural extension of the migratory patterns that birds had already mapped out for thousands of years. Think about it. The same wind currents that guide birds on their epic journeys also shape the movement of people. The same storms that disrupted a bird's flight may have delayed a fleet of ships. The same landscapes that birds avoided may have been the same ones that armies found impassable. In this way, birds may have been the first cartographers, drawing the lines that humans would later follow. But here's the twist. While humans have always recorded their own journeys, we've never really paid attention to the ones that birds have made. What if the true story of human expansion is not just written in the annals of history, but in the flight paths of the natural world? What if the very routes that allowed empires to rise and fall were quietly orchestrated by the wings of birds? This is the story of how the sky was not just a place for birds, but a silent blueprint for the rise and fall of civilizations. Starts with a question. What if the paths birds take across the globe have shaped the destiny of empires? Birds have been flying the same routes for millennia, long before humans mapped the world. These ancient pathways, now known as flyways, weren't just for birds. They were invisible highways that guided explorers, merchants, and armies. Wait until you see how these routes became the backbone of global empires. Think about it. The same corridors that cranes and swans used to migrate across continents were also the same routes that early humans followed in their search for food, shelter, and trade. These flyways were natural corridors shaped by wind patterns, climate, and geography. They weren't just paths for birds. They were the earliest maps of the world, drawn not by human hands, but by instinct and evolution. Consider the Silk Road. We often think of it as a human creation, a network of trade routes that connected east and west. But what if it was also following the same migratory patterns that birds had been using for thousands of years? The same winds that carried birds across the skies also carried the scent of spices, the sound of languages, and the movement of people. These flyways weren't just biological, they were cultural and economic arteries. And then there's the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan and his successors expanded one of the largest empires in history, stretching from China to Eastern Europe. But how did they know where to go? How did they find the best routes to conquer and control? The answer may lie in the birds that had already been flying those routes for centuries. The Mongols were not just following the land, they were following the sky. These flyways shaped not just trade and conquest, but also the spread of ideas, religions, and technologies. The same paths that birds used to escape the cold became the same paths that humans used to build empires. It's a story of coexistence, of nature and human ambition intertwined. It is a story that we've never really seen before. First, the Silk Road wasn't just a land route. It was also a sky route, shaped by the migration of cranes and storks. These birds, traveling in predictable patterns across Asia, Europe, and Africa, may have been the first to chart the way for human travelers. Merchants, nomads, and explorers likely observed these movements, using them as guides to navigate the vast, often treacherous landscapes of the ancient world. Second, the discovery of the Americas might have been accelerated by the flight patterns of seabirds. Long before Columbus set sail, birds like the albatross and the frigate bird were already traversing the Atlantic, following currents and wind patterns that would later be used by sailors. Could it be that these birds were the first to bridge the gap between continents, and that humans simply followed their lead? But here's where it gets wild. The very same birds that helped empires rise may have also signaled their decline, as their migration shifted with climate and conflict. When the Mongol Empire began to crumble, did it coincide with a change in the migration of birds that had once guided their conquests? When European powers expanded across the globe, did they follow the same routes that birds had already established? And then, as those routes changed, did their empires begin to falter? Birds are not just passive travelers. They are sensitive to the world around them. Changes in climate, pollution, and human activity can alter their migration patterns in ways that are subtle but significant. And if these patterns once guided human history, what happens when they shift again? This is more than just a story of migration. It's a story of how nature has always been intertwined with human destiny, shaping the rise and fall of empires in ways we've never fully understood. And it raises a question that we can ignore. What will happen when the birds change their course once more? The rise and fall of empires wasn't just about war and politics. It was also about the silent choreography of the skies. Here's why this changes everything you thought you knew about the forces that shape the modern world. For centuries, we've told ourselves that history was written by humans, by kings, generals, and politicians. But what if the true architects of history were the birds that flew above them? What if the same winds that carried armies across continents also carried the messages, the goods, and the ideas that defined entire civilizations? This isn't just a curiosity, it's a revelation. It forces us to rethink the way we understand human progress, trade, and expansion. The paths that birds have followed for millennia may have been the invisible scaffolding upon which the world was built. And as those paths shift, as climate and environment change, so too may the course of human history. This is the power of perspective. We've always looked down at the world, and maps and borders and roads and rivers. But what if the real story is written in the sky? What if the true map of human history isn't drawn on paper, but in the flight of birds? This is why this changes everything. It challenges the way we see ourselves as the sole authors of our destiny. It reminds us that we are not separate from nature. We are a part of it. And if the birds can guide empires, then perhaps they can also warn us of what's to come. So the next time you see a flock of birds in the sky, don't just watch them pass. Think about what they're doing. They may be flying the same routes that shape the world, and they may be telling us something we've yet to understand. Next time you see a flock of birds in the sky, think about the hidden history they might be carrying. These are not just animals following instinct. They are ancient travelers mapping the world long before we had maps. Their flight paths have shaped the course of human history in ways we've only begun to understand. What if the same winds that carried birds across continents also carried the seeds of empires? What if the same storms that disrupted a bird's journey also delayed the arrival of explorers or the spread of ideas? The natural world has always been more than a backdrop to human events. It has been an active participant, a silent force shaping the rise and fall of civilizations. And this is just the beginning. There are still so many unanswered questions, so many connections we've yet to discover. What other forces in nature have influenced the course of human history? What other patterns have we overlooked, hidden in plain sight? That's why I'm asking you to comment below with your wildest theories about nature's influence on human history. What if the stars guided not just sailors, but the very direction of human ambition? What if the migration of whales influenced the trade routes of ancient mariners? What if the tides, the seasons, the very rhythm of the earth itself have been shaping our past in ways we've never considered? This is the kind of thinking that changes how we see the world. It challenges the idea that history is written by humans alone and opens the door to a deeper, more interconnected understanding of our place in the universe. So if you found this video mind-bending, if you're ready to explore more connections you never saw coming, then hit that subscribe button, because the story of history is far more fascinating and far more mysterious than we ever imagined.